You're watching The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ Envy, Angela Yee, Charlamagne the God. We are The Breakfast Club. We got a special guest in the building.
Yes, I've been looking forward to this one.
Roland Martin.
My guy Roland Martin is here.
How's it going?
Now, Roland, we just had a white man in here who was he's a Trump apologist. Okay, he said that Trump won't get impeached and all this talk of Russia is fake news. What do you say to people?
He said there's no evidence.
There's no evidence.
Well, it's always interesting when someone says there's no evidence. That's why they have investigations.
Mm-hmm.
The whole point of that. Now, here's the question that I would ask him. Why is it that every time there is an issue dealing with a foreign country, it happens to be Russia? There's nobody else.
Yeah.
It's never Germany. It's not Italy. It's not Spain. It's not Cuba. It's not Venezuela. It's always Russia.
Yeah.
There's a link there. Trump keeps saying, oh, no, we have no ties, no money from Russia. Yet his son is on record years ago saying, oh, yeah, we got billions flowing into our company from Russia. Okay, so which one is it? So who's lying and who's telling the truth? And so the reality is there's lots of smoke there. There are issues there. Do I believe Donald Trump owes significant amounts of money to Russian oligarchs? Absolutely. If you go through the campaign, anytime Putin came up, Trump made all his excuses. Now, I'll just use an example. So let's say you and I having a conversation, and then all of a sudden, I say, well, Jimmy, a great guy. You like, Jimmy owe me money. Jimmy's wonderful. No, Jimmy slapped me upside my head. Man, we hung out when we were in New York. Every time you would dog Jimmy, I would tell you how Jimmy is trifling. At some point, you probably would say, well, damn, how much do you owe Jimmy? This is very basic.
Yeah.
And that's the case here. This man refuses to body check Putin, refuses to say anything. Even when our intelligence agency, 17, said Russia colluded, he said, it could have been the Chinese.
Got you.
Now,
Why?
Here's another debate we were having too. Now, let's say, do you believe that Trump could be impeached? And if he is impeached, what could potentially happen? Would it be everybody? If they find out that Russia had something to do with the election.
Because it seems like the whole administration is corrupt.
Would it mean that everybody's out of there?
No. First of all, keep in mind, the high crimes and misdemeanors is a congressional standard. That's not a legal standard. So when people say, well, it's like a court, no, it's not like a courtroom. It's a whole different standard. I take the opposite view. That is, if you don't like Trump, you actually don't want Trump impeached. What you want is you want him to sustain massive body blows every single time comes up. Because if he gets impeached, well, who becomes president? Well, Mike Pence. Mike Pence, widely respected among conservatives, especially social conservatives, comes across as very even-tempered. Some people say, oh, I really like the guy. But then when you look at his policies, you've lost your mind. But you want crazy. See, crazy works to your advantage.
For the next election.
Because everybody has to defend crazy. And so you don't want sane. You want crazy. That's first. The second thing is, look at historically. Watergate took 900 days. Everybody forgets. Nixon got reelected. And then he was later, he had to resign when he was clear he was going to get impeached. And so you actually want Trump taking massive body blows. You want in 2018 every Republican running for Congress to have to defend Donald Trump. You want every United States senator, every House member. That's what you want. You want the folks running on the state level to have to defend all of his policies. That's really what you want, as opposed to letting crazy leave.
Okay.
Now, and I saw you tweeting this morning about the NAACP and how to save it from irrelevance. I think it was an article Melissa
Harris wrote a piece for the New York Times. Which, okay, fine. It's always interesting to me when we have conversations about black organizations in white newspapers. Just a thought. I'm just saying, if we're going to have a black conversation about the NAACP, well, let's actually have it in black newspapers. Let's have it on black radio. So, but here's the other thing. Whenever first of all, if you go back and look at the last 60 years of the NAACP, literally the same pieces have been written. Oh, my God, they might be irrelevant. They're still here. Okay, they're here for a reason.
They are irrelevant.
But they're not irrelevant.
In a way.
They're not irrelevant. How?
I'm trying to think, what has the NAACP done significant in the past 20 years?
Well, first and foremost, there are things they do every single day you have no idea about. And I can guarantee you, when you're in one of these towns and something happens to you, who do you call? See, the problem is
Ghostbusters.
We're sitting here at 30,000 feet saying, well, what are they doing? First of all, the NAACP is a volunteer organization. Other than your staff in Baltimore, these are volunteer folks. So when you look at what's happening on the ground in cities across this country, when you look at the folks who are challenging city councils and county governments when it comes to disparity studies, when it comes to the issue of civil rights, they are there. We spend lots of time saying what they don't do, but I then challenge people, okay, where are you? I look at Nikema Levy-Pounds in Minneapolis, where they criticized a lackluster NAACP. You know what they did? They went in and took it over. Okay, so somebody out there, if you think the NAACP is not doing anything in your town, you are more than welcome to join, get you another group of people to join, and literally take the organization over to move it forward. But there are things that are done every single day.
Like what, though?
Well, again, when you talk about challenging various voting restrictions, voting laws, when you talk about dealing with this issue of police brutality in cities, who is the first organization people call? NAACP. They're not calling Minister Farrakhan. They're not calling some lawyer. They're like, oh my God, my child has been beaten, or my kid has been suspended and it was wrong. Who am I calling? NAACP. We don't hear that every day because that's just not necessarily our life every day. There are people out there every day, people with no money, people who are broke, people here in these towns who are saying, man, there's somebody who I can call when I get into trouble. They're not calling Sharpton First Day. They're calling that local NAACP chapter.
Well, let me push back on that a little, because if you look at like what's happened over the past 5 or 6 years with police brutality, and you saw the rise of a new committee, so to speak, the BLM, shouldn't that have been the NAACP role?
No, because if anybody who understands the Black Freedom Movement understands that you have the big six organizations, NAACP, National Urban League, King comes along with Montgomery Improvement Association, that transforms into Southern Christian Leadership Conference. You have the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that was, of course, when they met at Shaw University. And so it's interesting. So in Melissa's piece, she talked about, of course, BYP, Black Youth Project 100. Well, they're the equivalent today of what SNCC was, which was a student or young folks driven organization. The NAACP then was called the old folks organization.
I was going to ask you, do they have young leadership? Because I don't see it as much.
I don't see them.
And when you ask, who do you call? They probably would be the last people I would call if I got into something. If it wasn't,
yes, because you're here in New York.
So different chapters have different amounts of power, and depending on the city you're in.
Different parts of the country. But if you're in a southern town, if you're in a southwest town, and you don't have a New York Justice League, or you don't have a Reverend Al Sharpton National Action Network, who are you gonna call? See, I mean, I've spoken at numerous NAACP Freedom Fund dinners across the country, and I can tell you, in terms of the only civil rights organization that exists in that town or city is largely NAACP. The issue for a lot, so we make assumptions because we're looking at this through a big city prism, as opposed to really where a lot of these chapters are, where you don't have national leadership, you don't have massive mass media, you don't have people who are out on television and radio. No, they're like, man, that's the only shot we got in terms of somebody being able to speak for us. The challenge for us as African Americans is, how many of us are members? How many of us are actually actively looking to change things inside? It's very easy to say on the outside, oh man, they're irrelevant, or what are they doing? Well, they should be doing more. But if we're not there, if we're not in the meetings, if we're not present and accounted for, well then whose fault is it? In essence, we are asking somebody else to do the work, and then we're going to critique your work or lack of work, and then say you're ineffective.
Do you think that as an
organization, it's not a matter of critique though? It's a matter of, you say who's on the front line. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't seen much of the NAACP in the last 10 years, and I went to school at Hampton University.
Rachel Dolezal.
And I'm from South Carolina, and I never really saw the NAACP.
I would donate money to Al Sharpton. I would donate money to the minister. I would donate money to all these different people because I see the work that they're doing. I just don't see it. I'm not saying that they aren't there. I don't see it as much as.
So
here's the question. So when the Supreme Court made this decision when it came to a black man who was going to be put to death in Texas, who actually argued that case before the Supreme Court? NAACP, Legal Defense and Education Fund. Now, two separate entities. LDF is different from the NAACP, but that's who actually argued that particular lawsuit. When you look, when the FCC passed the decision when it came to the amount of money black folks, folks were being charged in jails making collect phone calls, which is billions of dollars. You had NAACP attorneys who are actually fighting that with the FCC. My point is this here. There are a significant number of things that are happening in this country that civil rights organizations are involved in that we don't see because they're not holding news conferences. They're doing the work. That's what they're doing. And so what I'm saying is we have to measure, okay, what are folks doing as opposed to what are folks saying? I simply make the argument that if we believe that an entity is ineffective, we have to first say to ourselves, one, what is my relationship with the entity? What do I know about the organization? And am I speaking out of ignorance, meaning I simply don't know or I simply haven't heard? Those are things that we have to ask ourselves. Does the NAACP have issues? Yes. Is the board too large? Yes. Do you have bureaucracy? Yes. But I will say this, for all the criticism folks have levied against the NAACP, there still is a single civil rights organization that is still here, that is still present, that is still active, and that's the NAACP.
Well, they need you to hire you as their spokesperson.
No.
You can't.
No. I'm just saying, but the same thing with the National Urban League. The role.
I'm from South Carolina. In Columbia, the Urban League had more of a presence than NAACP.
Right, and what I'm saying is, in certain places, depending upon where you are, you might have a larger presence of the Urban League, larger presence of the NAACP. They're all there. I just think what happens is we have to challenge ourselves to say, okay, what are we also looking for in an organization? I go back to the basic premise. It's a volunteer organization. If a number of us are not present or not active, are not involved, then also, if our organizations fail, then whose fault is it? It's the same thing. I mean, I see the sign right there, with Hampton. I got to get my pen out there. I started this thing called HBCU Giving Day. I went to Texas A&M. I didn't go to HBCU. But when I talked to the president of Howard University, who says he took over and only 3% of undergraduate students were giving, now it's up to 10%. When Florida A&M says only 5% of our alumni are giving, if all of a sudden our institutions fail, who are we going to blame? When we're only giving 3 to 5%.
That's real.
So black folks are going to have to answer a very serious question. Are we going to sit on the sidelines and say, man, y'all ain't doing this? Or are we going to say, am I giving to a HBCU, even if I didn't go to one? Am I involved in a civil rights organization? Am I contributing funds? Am I teaching my children how to get involved? And I'll just leave the last one, NAACP AXO competition. You got young folks out there, because you mentioned young leadership. There are individuals who have had experiments on the space shuttle who won an NAACP AXO competition. If the NAACP AXO competition doesn't exist, the number of black kids who are in science, who are singing, who are playing the violin, or who are doing all those different categories, that academic competition does not even exist. Imagine if they no longer existed, that didn't exist. Thousands of black kids who are brilliant would have no place to leverage their talent. That's why I'm saying we got to take a much more broader 360-degree view of an organization and not just a very narrow sliver.
Now, you mentioned HBCUs, and Donald Trump is going to be cutting the funding. Now, what should the HBCU leaders do as far as that is concerned?
Well, actually, so here's what happened there. One, there has not been a cut in funding. What he said at the signing ceremony was that they may not fund the building portion of it because he had no clue what the hell HBCUs is. First of all, historically, which was stupid. And 2 days later, he had to backtrack from it because it was just dumb. Because Congress made the designation in the 60s, historically black colleges and universities. He ain't like only black people can go. That's how dumb it was. And so he hasn't cut the funding. Now, funding did get cut under President Barack Obama. You have these issues going back and forth there in terms of support for HBCUs. Now, the advocacy for HBCUs has to exist whether you have a Republican president or Democratic president. But keep in mind, Congress actually makes the allocation. So what happened was before, when some HBCU funding was on the chopping block, they went to Republican leaders in Congress, got the money restored. What we have to do in terms of African Americans, again with HBCUs, is stop also thinking it's just Washington, D.C. Right now, in Maryland, there's a major lawsuit involving the historically underfunding of HBCUs. That lawsuit has been fought by, again, many civil rights organizations, and most people have no idea. Alvin Chambliss was the one who successfully sued Mississippi for the funding there. I went to North Carolina when they were trying to rig that system there to cut the funding there. You have the same thing happening in Texas. So forget D.C. Black folks need to be arguing in our state governments where we have HBCUs that are public to ensure the funding actually goes there as well. But the other point is this here. We can't rely on public dollars or governmental dollars to save our institutions. Because when foundations say, well, what's the giving of your graduates? And they go, only 3% of our graduates give. A foundation goes, so you asking me to give you $10 million for your HBCU, but only 3% of your graduates are giving. Now, when I say 3% of graduates are giving, I'm not saying 3% of giving $5,000. 3% of giving, period. Not even a dollar. That means 97% not even sending a dollar back. Now, many folks will go back for homecoming. And they'll spend money on airline tickets and food and drinks and travel, but will not send a dollar. And so, again, for me, we have to be about saving our institutions, building our institutions, strengthening our institutions, whether it's civil rights groups, whether it's HBCUs, whether it's our economic groups as well.
So basically supporting our own, basically.
So supporting our own, but support is not defined solely as, hey, I'm praying for y'all.
Word.
And that's part of the deal.
Yeah, you gotta
like,
get that
I'm
money
praying
up.
for you. No, I don't need you to pray for me. I'm good with God. I need you to do some work.
$1 that. Yeah.
I need you to do some work.
Now,
but we good and I'll pray for you.
Yeah. Now, one quick thing about the NAACP, it's another, it's like a narrative that they sold out to white dollars.
Okay, but here's the deal. So what's the narrative? They sold out to white dollars.
Yeah, like so it's really white people running the NAACP, so it's really they don't care about black interests, things like that.
Well, for anybody who says that, I would then go, what the hell are you talking about? Because first of all, there were white founders of the NAACP. So that did exist. It was the Niagara Movement preceded the NAACP. And so it was a multi-racial coalition that formed the NAACP, which started after a race riot in Springfield, Illinois. But then, of course, you have people who say, well, you're accepting a corporate dollars. And, okay, I got it. But again, I go back to this. If we don't want our institutions accepting corporate dollars, well, then are we going to fund it?
You are absolutely right.
I mean, it's just basic for me. I can't say y'all should take the corporate money, but I want to see y'all doing all this sort of stuff here. Who gonna pay for it? Dog, I ain't got it. I ain't got it. No, that's just one of those things there. That again, it really comes back down to it. Now when you talk about also our dollars, you know what we're going to deal with the National Urban League State of Black America Town Hall deals with economics, and what we have to understand is, I really need people to understand this historically. We're only 2 years away from the 400th commemoration of the first people of African descent coming to this country. That was in August of 1619 in Virginia. So if you look at 1619 to 1863 as 244 years of legalized slavery, 2-year period of the war. War ends in 1865. You have the 12 years of Reconstruction, the most important 12 years in the history of black folks in terms of massive change. Reconstruction Amendments, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. Jim Crow comes in 1877 because of the Great Compromise of 1877. So then you go for nearly 100 years of Jim Crow. So if you use 1970 as the marker, and the reason I hit 1970, King gets killed in 68, Fair Housing Act gets signed in 68, affirmative action comes in with Arthur Fletcher with Richard Nixon in 69 and 70. That means that black folks have technically been fully free Americans only for 47 years. Which means that, so I'm 48. I'll be 49 in November. Which means I was born into America where I was not technically fully free. Which now I don't have any children, which means my nieces and my nephews, they are the first generation of black kids born technically fully free. Why is that important? Because if you saw the New York Times story last week of the highest paid CEOs in America, one, I believe, maybe it was two, I can pull it up, were African American. It's 200. So if you look at significant sectors, you never had anybody African American run a Hollywood studio. No one African American has ever run a major media company in terms of ABC, CBS, Fox News, those companies. When you look at the positions where we don't exist, hedge funds, name it, that means there's a significant amount of wealth in America that we have no idea even exists. Now, we keep looking at LeBron and looking at Kobe, heard your conversation earlier, and we look at Dwayne Wade and look at all these guys. But the reality is, that's such a small number. As Chris Rock said, he said, me and Mary J. Blige are the only black people in my neighborhood. Yeah. He said, and my next door neighbor's a plumber.
Yeah, a dentist. Yeah.
Living next to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, what does that say? And so we have been locked out economically. How does that hurt us? That means that when there's a glass ceiling, if you will, and we can't get over it, get above it, that impacts the ability for us to fund HBCUs, to fund civil rights organizations. So you have very few African Americans who can say, okay, I'm going to give $50 million to the Urban League, or $50 million to the NAACP, or $100 million to Hampton. Yet you see these gifts that are given to Harvard and to Yale and to all of the different schools. It's because we've been locked out economically. Now, where have black folks prospered? Public jobs, meaning city government, county government, police, fire. So what happens when Republicans come in and say, big government, we're going to slash? They're literally slashing black middle class. See, you begin to connect all the dots there. So part of this fight the Urban League is involved in, that I push all the time, is we have to have a laser-like focus on the inequities when it comes to economics. And because I'll frame it this way. You been to the White House?
Never.
Been by the White House? Been by the White House?
Yep.
Been by the White House.
Outside the gate.
There's only one federal agency that shares a lawn with the White House.
Which one? What is that?
Take a guess.
One federal agency.
Just one. Out of all of them. Treasury. You want to understand America, White House, power. Treasury is money. Right. Power, money, money, power. If you don't have money, you don't have power. You don't have power, you ain't getting money. That's where we were. We've been fighting for civil rights. Our focus has to be silver rights.
Well, that's what Martin Luther King Jr.'s next plan was when he was trying to organize
last 5 years of his life,
the Poor People's March and stuff like that. That's when, I mean, a lot of people say that's why they actually killed him, when he was trying to financially empower people.
Well, remember, he was killed April 4th, 1968, and it was April 4th, 1967, where he gave his Beyond Vietnam speech at Riverside Church. No coincidence, he was killed on the day a year later. And in that particular speech, yes, he talked about the war in Vietnam, its impact in terms of on the poverty programs. But also, anybody listening, they must read his book, Chaos or Community. Where do we go from here? Chaos or Community, because he laid, first of all, it was the worst selling book of his life. And he laid out in that particular book what we are facing, and it still resonates today. But what's amazing in the book, he also said, many of our white allies will not be with us because they say, okay, you've gotten enough. And if you look at every point in American history, that has been the case. So if you look at Reconstruction, those 12 years, amazing 12 years. 6, 7 years in, white folks say, okay, look, we good. All right, now we done enough for y'all. Can we just, I mean, we about tired of this. Can we move on? Okay. Reconstruction ends in 1877. Same thing happens. Black Freedom Movement. Montgomery takes place. The bus boycott there, and then all of a sudden, 1954. Then you go forward. Then what happens? Okay, look, yeah, we got some laws: Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, Fair Housing Act. All right, we good. But the reality is, we're not good. It has to be sustained. And that's part of the issue here where we must be. So what John Hope Bryan is doing with Operation Hope when it comes to increasing credit scores by 120 points, which impacts us because if your car insurance has a high interest rate, and your house has a high interest rate, you're spending significant, crazy amounts of money just paying interest. Lack of housing. We lost 53% of all black wealth due to the home foreclosure crisis. 53% of all black wealth lost, gone. Went from owning to renting. How did that impact us? 2013, 23.09 billion small business loans handed out. We only got 385 million. Why? We don't have stocks and bonds. We had homes. No home, no loan, no business. So the way economics has impacted us, it is putting us in a position where we're going to be forever renters, forever debtors, which means we must be about not only structurally changing a system, what the Urban League is doing, what the NAACP is doing, but also individually.
Yes.
So I challenge black folks, for your children, don't buy your kids a pair of LeBron's new shoes for Christmas. Sit your kids down and say, son or daughter, I'm going to buy you a Nike stock. Because you're not going to wear these shoes in a year, but you'll still be able to own the Nike stock.
So you agree with what LeVar Ball is trying to do?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because first of all, he's creating a company. There are 2.6 million black-owned businesses in America. 2.5 million only have one employee. The average revenue of a average black-owned business in America is $78,000. If LeVar sells 200 pair of those shoes, he has actually earned more than 2.5 million of the black-owned businesses in America.
Oh, he did that already. So
that's
like 400, 500.
That's my point. Mm-hmm. So now, granted, I think sometimes dad need to shut up, you know, because like, dude, you're killing your son's Q rating. But from a business standpoint, that's exactly what's happening.
Absolutely.
And so that's where we have to be. We have to be about right now changing mindset, how we look at things, how we value things, and saying, no, you don't need that for your ego. Tell your friends to go to hell. You don't need to impress them. The issue for you is, how are you investing in creating wealth and building wealth? Because if we are having this conversation 30 years from now, we failed.
Right.
Power, money, power. That's America.
And you think sometimes we put ourselves at a disadvantage because we talk ourselves out of things. Like, oh, well, we can't do that. We don't normally invest. We don't invest in stocks because I feel like the attitude is, this is just not something that we do. I've heard people say that. Women, too. Women and also people of color just say, right, oh, we don't historically do that because we're going to lose all our money. Or why we put our money in stocks. It's all a scam. Everything's like programmed for us to think it's not for us to do.
I think it's knowledge, too. You know,
it's all knowledge.
The thing with stock, I didn't invest in stock when I first started out because my parents didn't, because they didn't
absolutely
know. They didn't have the education. Nobody taught them about the stock market.
Well, is it so in September you need to have this guy on the show, John Hope Bryant. Mm-hmm. He has a book coming out called The Memo. And he talks about the memo that black people never got. Right. Lincoln created the Freedmen's Bank. We know about the Freedmen's Bureau.
Right.
But the Freedmen's Bank was created right across from the White House. He gets killed 2 months after his creation. Then pretty much it withers on the vine. Frederick Douglass put the equivalent of $20 million today into the Freedmen's Bank. Mm-hmm. The Freedmen's Bank was created to teach freed slaves financial literacy and offer them their own particular bank. It withered. Again, that was the intent. So you're absolutely right. We say that, it doesn't mean we can't change it. Mm-hmm. Just because, as you said, your parents didn't know. Just the same thing. Black kids are raised, become a doctor, become a lawyer, that's successful.
Right.
There's a guy in Dallas right now who's a hedge fund guy. He said, I never even heard of hedge funds. He said, I didn't know they existed. Mm-hmm. He said, until I went to a meeting in Austin, this guy said, you want to ride on my plane? He said, man, how you get this plane? He said, oh, this is what I do. Now, his parents taught him to be a doctor. He became an emergency room physician, was doing very well for, again, black standards. Right. Then all of a sudden he said, hold up, you got your own plane? And you're making how much a year? He said, I had no idea. This is why we must expose our children to a different view.
Absolutely.
And Verizon has this new ad, and I got pull it up in a second. I saw it at a Silicon Valley event. It was very, and I've been talking about this for 10 years, but here's what's amazing about this here. So they asked all these black kids, what do you want to be? Oh, police officer, teacher, firefighter, whatever. Then they put on the screen all these jobs and what they paid. And these kids are like, 90, 120, 150, 170. All of a sudden they said, I want to be that. When you don't know.
It's about exposure.
When you don't. Right. And what we have to be about that, changing folks' mind, changing their perceptions, and again, reprogramming our people, reprogramming us where your value is not tied up in your watch, in your suit, tied up in those things. No, your value is tied up. Can you be debt free? It's weneedmore.com. That's the website. But that's the value. Mm-hmm. The value is tied up in what's the wealth you're creating? What are you leaving your children? Can you be in a position to send your nieces and nephews to college, and then they don't have to be debt free? That's really where we have to be.
Absolutely. Now this, he got to go, so you got to business.
Oh man,
he got a hard out.
I guess with
ain't nothing but a train. I can always come back.
Yeah, with everything you're saying, like, how do you think people can stay committed to these movements when everybody's attention span is so short?
This is very basic. There's no revolution in the world that has ever started with mass consensus. Doesn't require a big meeting. You have to get everybody together. Same thing. If you want to do something on this show, you don't have to wait to get everybody together. You say, I got an idea. And you tell her. She's like, that's a good idea. Let's go tell him. And then let's go tell him and tell him. That's the same way. I say this all the time. You can't have a great America without great states. Great states need great cities. Great cities need great neighborhoods. Great neighborhoods need great blocks. Great blocks need great streets. Great streets need great houses. And there has to be at least one house on the street, which means one person in the house to say, you know what? This is how we're not going to start living. And so you have to start extremely small. Somebody's listening saying, man, I don't have any money to save. Yes, you do. Did you go buy a soft drink? Tell yourself, I'm not going to buy 2 soft drinks this week. I'm going to take that $5 and put it here. I do that every week. I got $20 at the end of the month. I got $240 at the end of the year. Now, somebody's going to say, man, that's $240. But it's $240 more you have saved than you had saved last year.
Yeah, right.
It all starts very small.
Yeah.
I tell people about reading. It's very simple. Read one book, a book you love, sports, whatever the heck. Get you in the habit of reading. That's how, as a kid, I read 300 books a summer. It is a state of mind, but you have to start where you are. And I'll leave you with this one because, Alana's like, we got to go. The book of Nehemiah, chapter 2. Nehemiah, the wall of Jerusalem had crumbled. He went in, saw the wall, came up with a plan, went to the people, and if you read scripture, it said the people said, let us rebuild. Not Nehemiah, you rebuild. The people said, let us rebuild. You further read chapters 3 and 4. They mention who built this portion of the gate, which means they only built the portion of the gate that was right in front of them. They didn't worry about what's happening around the corner and rebuilt what's happening in front of them. If you care about our kids and education, stop worrying about some kids you ain't never met. What's up with your nieces and your nephews and your cousins? How are you helping them out? And then you do go from family to neighbors, neighbors to street, street to block, block, blocks, blocks, neighborhood, neighborhood, city, city, state, state, nation, nation, world. That's the only way you're able to affect change.
My man Roland Martin, the News One Now show.
He's doing something this Wednesday.
Tonight, 8 p.m.
8 p.m.
State of Black America Town Hall.
Yes.
We've got some great panelists on that, great conversation. But that's just that. We're going to continue that conversation beyond that, do it every single day, which is what we do on News One Now every day. And my job is to give them folks hell every day.
And you do.
Every day.
All right, it's The Breakfast Club. It's Mr. Roland Martin.
The Breakfast Club. Every weekday morning. Tune in